Welcome to the Pan Am Podcast, brought to you by the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York. This podcast and our museum are dedicated to celebrating the legacy of the world's most iconic airline, Pan American World Airways. My name is Tom Betty, and I'm the host of this program. Thank you for joining us. This program is sponsored by the generous support of Mr. Adam Aron, the CEO of AMC Entertainment Holdings Incorporated. The Pan Am Museum Foundation is a nonprofit organization. Please visit our website for more information at thepanammuseum.org. Again, our website is thepanammuseum.org. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. If you are using Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a review. It will help others discover this program. If you're not familiar with Pan Am, welcome. We are honored to have you here, and for you to learn about what we're all about. If you already know of Pan Am, worked for or flown on the airline, or just love our history, it's good to be with you again. So with that, let's get this episode in the air, so to speak. Welcome aboard your Pan American Jet Clipper. In this episode, we are joined by Dr. Johanna O'Flaherty. Johanna joined Pan American World Airways in 1970 as a flight attendant and was later promoted to purser, trainer, and in 1986 was appointed corporate manager of Pan Am's new Employee Assistance Program, also known commonly today as EAP. In this role, Johanna was responsible for the oversight of bio-psychosocial spiritual aspects of the 1988 Lockerbie disaster. Her new book, a memoir called Flight with Weighted Wings, was released in January of 2023 and is available from the Pan Am Museum's online store. There is a link in the episode description to purchase this book. Also, Johanna's Pan Am corporate video to new employees from 1987 is available on our YouTube channel. There is also a link to this video in the episode description. Today, Johanna is an expert in crisis management from a psychological perspective and a renowned expert in the field of trauma, addiction, and recovery. She served as Vice President of Treatment Services at the Betty Ford Center from 2006 to 2013, before serving as CEO of the Las Vegas Recovery Center Senior Fellow of Clinical Services from 2013 to 2016. Johanna received her Doctorate of Philosophy and Clinical Psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute in California. In addition, she adds her 40 years of personal recovery to her long list of accomplishments. Johanna developed and implemented crisis response programs for Pan American World Airways, Trans World Airlines, and has facilitated the training of crisis response teams for several other airlines as well. Working at Pan Am during the Lockerbie bombing led to her becoming a pioneer in the aviation industry, organizing, training, and responding to aviation disasters, and facilitating trauma processing, grief counseling, and critical incident stress debriefing guidelines. In 1996, she provided counseling services to the family members of the 230 individuals, including over 50 TWA employees, who perished on Flight 800, the third deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history to date. In 2000, she received the FBI's Exceptional Service in the Public Interest Award. Then, in September of 2001, Dr. O'Flaherty was again called to New York to assist with counseling airline employees and facilitating the crisis response training for the New York City Transit Authority after the terrorist attacks of September 11th. She also conducted critical incident response training for the FBI and first responders. Dr. O'Flaherty provided counseling to the first and last responders of the October 1st, 2017 massacre at the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival on the Las Vegas Strip, where 58 people were killed and another 546 injured. The incident is the deadliest mass shooting committed by an individual in the United States to date. Dr. O'Flaherty has been featured on American news channels such as CBS, ABC, NBC, and CNN, as well as several podcasts as an expert in her field. To listen to more of Dr. O'Flaherty, check out the podcast called Living on Brand with Kim and Glenda. There is a link in the episode description to Johanna's episode. For more information on Johanna or to contact her, her website is www.johannahelps.com. There is a link in the episode description. Today, Johanna maintains a consulting practice and has an active schedule as a keynote speaker in crisis management and addiction. She resides in Las Vegas, Nevada. Welcome to the program, Johanna.
Thank you, Tom. I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. Let's first start about how you started flying and when you started flying with Pan Am.
Well, I started flying with Pan Am in, I think I was hired in July 1970, and then based in New York. And it was very frightening for me. I'd flown for a couple of years with a chartered airline in England, Monarch, and there was a small airline and so on. Pan Am was not frightening. Living in New York was very intimidating. And I thought that I'd get out of there as fast as I could. We could transfer after 6 months. And when the West Coast opened up, I already had become acclimated to New York and stay there my whole career.
Oh, interesting. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Ireland in a very small town. In the South, County Kerry. The name of the town is Killorglin. You've probably never heard of it, but it's a very beautiful little town on the Irish coast, the Irish Sea.
So that's why moving to New York City as a young person was a little daunting.
Very daunting, yes. But I got used to it, and it was the 70s, and it was pretty crazy.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was crazy. It truly was a culture shock for me. The 70s was the time of, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I found myself with literally a high-flying group of flight attendants, and got really involved in the New York nightlife.
Oh, interesting. So tell us a little bit about that. I'm intrigued.
You are intrigued, huh? You're too young. I don't want to corrupt you.
1970s. Bring us back to the 1970s, partying, Studio 35?
Studio 54. It was Studio 54. Yes, indeed.
54.
I hung out there and along with my other flight attendant friends. And then we flew, which was wonderful. And, we find each other. It's kind of like birds of a feather. We find each other. And that was actually quite a fun time. But I really was always a deep thinker, and I grew up as a devout Catholic in Ireland, and actually had chosen the religion myself. So I'd chosen to really sort of worship the religion myself. So the 70s and the behaviors in New York were really quite contrary to the way I was raised, and it was bothering me. And fortunately, I found a way out of that lifestyle, and I'm very, very grateful for, that I did.
But let's talk a little bit about flying for Pan Am in the 1970s. You were flying all over the world, 747, is that correct?
I love the 747. I was flying the 747. On occasion, I would get on the 707, which I hated, because I was on a 707 going to Trinidad once early in the 70s, and we hit very, very severe clear air turbulence. Even the captain said afterwards it was the worst he'd ever experienced, and he'd been flying 33 years. So I was really quite traumatized, and I would avoid the 707 and fly the 747. That was my airplane. I loved it. And now, Tom, I'm a lousy cook. To this day, I'm a lousy cook. I loved before I checked out as a purser, I loved working the first class galley. I just loved it. I made everything look great. And anyway, all you had to do was heat things up. And so I used to work the first class galley or the first class cabin, which really were not very desirable positions because they were very, very hard work. But for some reason, I loved it and loved flying all over the world. It was amazing. What an experience for a young girl like me coming from Ireland, who would never, ever have had an opportunity to travel and be exposed to different cultures and all sorts of different peoples from all walks of life. And to me, actually, to tell you the truth, as somebody now with advanced degrees, flying with Pan American was probably the best education I ever got.
How so?
Well, you begin to not be as myopic and narrow-minded as we usually are when we're younger. You see the world and you know that, oh my God, we are all very much alike.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as I travel the world, I realize as human beings, we're so much alike. And it's some of our religions and our politics and our culture that tries to separate us. I was very fortunate. I never saw that. I saw us all in the same circle of life. And I love traveling. And actually, I mean, maybe it was kind of crazy, but when I had my time off, I'd go off on my own. I mean, here I am, 23, 24, and I would go off on my own traveling to Fiji, traveling all over the place. I had no common sense. I had no common sense, but I tell you, I must have been protected with a guardian angel. I have absolutely no regrets. I loved working with Pan American. I love aviation, love it, because I also worked for TWA.
It's funny, a few flight attendants have told me that worked the 747 that they also don't really cook now, and they don't know how. And they would say that, well, I can cook for 300 people on a 747, but I can't cook dinner for 6 people in my house. Is that kind of the same with you?
Absolutely. But I can make it look good, Tom. So when you come over, I'm going to fool you with presentation.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So you were a flight attendant and then you went to purser and a trainer.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that experience of being pretty much the boss on the plane, being a purser.
Yeah, I was the boss. As the children say, I was the boss of you. I was, as a purser, and I loved it, because I got a great compliment. Back in the day, we used to sign in. We'd show up and we'd actually manually sign in. And there was a couple of flight attendants, and I was waiting to sign in. And they could see who the purser was. And they said, oh, Johanna's the purser. Great. Because I was a team player. I would never ask a flight attendant to do something that I wouldn't do. So we were in there as a team and a crew. And we really had, it was amazing camaraderie. And I often reflect back now because, I've been working for many years as a psychologist. And I think some of the best team cohesiveness is on board an aircraft. And it still goes on to this day. Aboard an aircraft among, I'm sure, the pilots, because they have, crew resource management, and among the flight attendant crew, because we absolutely have to have each other's back.
Interesting. And then you advanced to the EAP corporate program for Pan Am. EAP is Employee Assistance Program. And before we talk about that, I wanted to let our listeners know that the way you and I met is through Linda Reynolds' videos that we put on YouTube. And I reached out to you and I said, oh, I found this video from the mid 80s. So that's how we met. So tell us a little bit about the Employee Assistance Program at Pan Am, which was kind of a new concept in the 1980s.
Absolutely. And we did meet through that video. And when you initiated contact with me, I thought, well, this guy's a scammer, because there's scammers all over the place. And what a delightful connection. You were such an asset to the Pan Am museum and program. So it was 1986. And at that time, each union on the property had several peer counselors, they would call them, that were helping their fellow peers who had problems, and primarily problems with alcohol. That was back in 86, so there wasn't too many drugs involved. Today it's a different story. And so my manager, flight service at the time, Susan Preem, a lovely lady, and we become good friends because remember, I was a trainer for training flight attendants to be pursers. So I worked a lot, very closely with management. And she had said, oh, Johanna, Dr. McCann, who was the medical department in the medical run, he's looking for somebody to run. She didn't even know it was an EAP program. Why don't you go down and visit with him? I said, I have no interest whatsoever in working 5 days a week, full time. So forget it, Susan, it's not happening. So she finally talked me into going down to talk to Dr. McCann. And I did not want the job. I had said to him, first what it did entail, because I was a peer helping flight attendants. I was one of the peers helping the flight attendants. And I said, I'm really not interested in this job, Dr. McCann, but I'm coming here to you because I will help whoever gets the job. And I would have helped them because I was going to continue being a peer in the flight service department, helping flight attendants that had substance abuse. Well, a long story short, there was interview after interview, and I got the job. And it was really quite amazing. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. But I must say that I worked extremely hard. And back then, there was not too many people that knew what they were doing. So there was a little airline group of airline employee assistance programs. So I would learn from them. And primarily my role was to do assessments of the employees that had problems and find them the appropriate treatment, and then coordinate with management that they would be off the line and it would be confidential and so on. So it worked extremely well. And I tell you, Tom, we were very busy. I didn't just work with flight attendants. This was the corporate EAP. So I worked with pilots, mechanics, rampers, passenger service, management, and their families. So it was a very, very, very active program.
Let's rewind for a second and talk about your personal journey, how you got into wanting to help people.
Thank you. Well, when I was a very young girl, I wanted to be a nun. And that would have been a way of helping people. But then I guess as I became a teenager, somebody realized that I was attractive. And then finally I realized that I was, and I started dating. So I forgot about being a nun. But I always wanted to help. There's a line from Whoopi Goldberg, and she says, you know what? I was going to be a nun or a flight attendant. And we're starring in this movie where she's a nun. And so I had a problem. I had a problem with alcohol when I was flying. Fortunately, I was only flying for 7 years at that time. And I was a periodic, which meant it was unoccasional intoxication and bad behavior. And so I was very fortunate. I got on the road of recovery. And so when I was on my road of recovery for several years, then I volunteered with the professional standards for the flight attendants. And most of the people that were on that professional standards were, women in recovery. We helped a lot of flight attendants. So actually transitioning from that role to the EAP, a lot of the skills transferred. But I, grew along very much and very fast in the EAP program, because I started in 86 and 1988. Lockerbie happened.
Yeah, let's talk about the tumultuous 1980s. I'd like to talk to you about Lockerbie.
Okay. Well, I was in the medical department, really as a counselor, knowing how to counsel, assess, refer, and manage the individual's care. And Lockerbie happened, and my medical director went immediately to Lockerbie to work with a pathologist. And then I was told, I want you to go to London and Lockerbie. And I go, and do what? What am I supposed to do in London or Lockerbie? We had no training on how to be, caregivers to the families of the victims. So I went to Lockerbie and I flew over to London, and flying over, the plane was full of relatives who had lost loved ones. And I was sitting next to a young woman who'd lost her husband, and she had 2 young children. And she's showing me photographs and everything. And I'm thinking, oh my God. So, and then I see the other Pan Am employees that were pulled out of marketing and pulled out of all over. And they're doing the best. They're trying to take away the pain from these family members, which you can't do. And so we all went and we stayed in London for a while. A lot of the families were in London. We were in the same hotel, I think the Hyde Park Hotel, if I recall correctly, because the folks at Lockerbie and the first responders, they had begged us not to come up because there was no accommodation, nothing in that small town. But the families got very, very, they got really, really aggressive about wanting to go to Lockerbie. And I understood it completely. I mean, I was not a decision maker. We were there trying to take care of the emotions. And finally, the decision was made to get 2 737s from Berlin. Pan Am had a base in Berlin at the time, and management pilots. And I don't know where they found the flight attendants, but we flew up with all the passengers. We flew up on Christmas Day to Lockerbie, to Prestwick, I guess. We flew into Prestwick, and then we had motorcades going to Lockerbie. I will never forget it, Tom. It's like it was yesterday. You know, the dreary weather in Lockerbie, pouring rain. Then we finally get to the scene, and there's the Maid of the Sea and the nose cone scattered all over the Scottish moors, first responders all over the place, and the families. The families were rather agitated on the way up. And I thought, I had some psychology degrees behind me then. And I thought, well, coming back, because they're going to make the connection of their lost one and this devastation of aircraft scattered all over the Lockerbie moors. So actually, that was true. That was true. The families, once they saw the nose cone and so on, they realized, their loved ones were gone, and they were much calmer on the way back. So all of us that were dispatched essentially to London and Lockerbie without training, essentially the training is on how to be a caregiver for somebody in intense grief and continue to have some form of objectivity and emotional detachment for yourself to protect yourself. We didn't have any of that. But I was one of the ones actually involved afterwards with the Air Transport Association in recommending training and developing programs. I was one of the pioneers out there for developing what now we know as care programs, because I felt we were all pretty badly burned psychologically with our roles in Lockerbie.
Thank you for sharing. I know it's difficult memories. Let's pivot for a second and talk about the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, because you dealt with that as well.
Yes, I did. So being in the medical department, and we had I was the only counselor at the time, and we had, full staff medical department with nurses and doctors. Male flight attendants would come into my office because we really had an allegiance. They knew I was an ex-flight attendant, and they would come in and they would pull up their shirt and they would show me all of these, like carcinoma that they had all over their body. And I didn't know what it was. But I had one of the doctors who was very empathetic. The doctors were very empathetic. And I would say to the doctors, can you please help me? I don't know what's going on with this. Can I send them in to you? They said, okay, fine. Come in. And then one of the doctors got very involved with the AIDS epidemic. He was a doctor at Pan Am, but he had his own private practice. His name was Dr. Yano, and he had his own private practice in New York, and was just a wonderful physician and got very involved in treating AIDS patients. So he was such a gift to us. It was tragic, Tom, because here were all these young, good-looking, in the prime of their life. And once you got a diagnosis of HIV and then HIV positive, and then, progressing into AIDS at that time, that was a death sentence. And so we collectively were probably grieving at that time. We were grieving, we were scared, and we were uninformed, and so were the doctors, with many doctors that I've talked to, along the way. And afterwards I said, oh my God, I knew nothing about AIDS when it came out. These physicians would tell me. And they had to sort of learn on the fly, so to speak. It's kind of like COVID, when it hit. And so that was a very, very sad time for the airlines. And we had a lot of male flight attendants that we lost.
Mm-hmm. And for our listeners, the employee assistance program that Johanna is talking about was a new concept. And Johanna, you were really a pioneer in this because this was a brand new thing.
It was.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the foundation that you built.
United Airlines had a good program at the time, and TWA had a program which was pretty good at the time also. And so we were also very generous in sharing with each other. And when Pan Am, started their corporate program, they were very good inviting me in, United and TWA. And I go, what are you doing? And a lot of the things that we're doing was very similar to what I was doing as a peer counselor in the flight attendant department. What was really difficult was getting management to buy in to the fact that your employee management education was a huge part of my role. Educating management on how to refer the employees to the employee assistance program. Because management, and I'm not blaming management, when you have a troubled employee on your crew, whether it's in flight or on the ground, they're very problematic. And you want to get rid of them at all costs. And you can't get rid of them because of the unions and so on. And I would never want them to get rid of them. And I would go out and I would we developed an educational program. And we would actually also talk about, look at the cost factor. If you identify a troubled employee, refer them early to the employee assistance program, we get them the appropriate treatment, return to your department a healthy employee, look at the cost factor. Now we're talking about, all employees, pilots, mechanics, again, as I mentioned earlier, all employees. So it took a little while, and I had a lot of resistance from some managers, only to find out later that they had been very wounded because there was alcoholism in their family. We became friends, and they became some of my best supporters and would refer, their employees. And of course, the earlier the employees referred, the better. Today, the majority of airlines have employee assistance programs. So all safety-sensitive companies have either an internal EAP program or an external. They contract it out. So I'm very proud of that part of my career and enjoyed it very much.
The experience that you had with Lockerbie, you were able to turn that into something positive.
Yes, very much so.
Tell us about that.
When I came back, I was really pissed off, if you can say that on this podcast, because I knew that I had been burnt emotionally and psychologically. And I knew that we were burnt because we didn't have the proper training. And so I told my boss, we've got to get a program here and we've got to get people, trained. And I wanted to find out who are the best people to train in this particular field. And so this was 88, remember, and Pan Am went under in 91. So I had the blueprints pretty ready for the program. I had done a lot of research, and there was no airline that had a program at the time. None. Nobody had a program, which now is the CARE programs that they have. And I contacted the Department of Casualty and Memorial Affairs, the United States military, and they're the best. They know how to do this. And we became pretty connected. And subsequently, they were very much collaborators with me when I went over to TWA, because we didn't have the time at Pan Am. I had all of the blueprints, pretty a template really, ready to go with my program for a CARE program. And Pan Am went under on December the 4th, 1991. And I couldn't believe it. I had multiple employees in treatment. And listen to this, Tom, no airline, no insurance. So the employees are in treatment and their insurance stops. Fortunately, all these treatment centers allow the employees to continue, the scholarship them essentially, and allow them to continue and finish their treatment and so on. And I continued to run pro bono support groups for the employees. The union, it was Transport Workers Union at the time, they set up a little room for me in their union office. And I ran for pilots and the others that were in recovery. I ran groups for, I don't know, maybe a year or less, because I went to TWA shortly afterwards.
How was that transition working at Pan Am, and then Pan Am ceases operations and you go over to TWA?
You know, the EAP field in the airlines, as you know, very, very small. So the day that my colleague from TWA called me was the day that TWA declared bankruptcy. It was a few months after Pan Am went out of business. And I said, are you crazy? That's like changing seats on the Titanic. I'm done. I'm done with airlines. Don't know. It's not happening. Well, so why don't you come and talk to us? So I went over to TWA, and at the time I had set up a small outpatient program of my own, really, to help airline employees. The TWA and Chuck Thibodeau, who was the Senior Vice President of Human Resources, great individual. He was gracious enough to say, I asked him, I said, Chuck, I'm very wounded because of Pan Am going under. I loved Pan American. Would you be willing to allow me to come on as a consultant? Because they wanted an employee. And he said, I will, Johanna, let's try it for a while. So I went on as a consultant, and I was a consultant for a few months. And then I was hired as the director of their special health services, which is the exact same as an employee assistance program. So I was working with them for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and I met with legal and some other senior officials, and they said, we want to develop essentially a care program, a trauma response program. And they said, how long do you think it's going to take you to develop this program in addition to your responsibilities at special health services? And I said, well, 3 months. They all started laughing. 3 months to develop a huge program? I said, oh, yes, because I have the template and I've done all the work. It will take 3 months. And it took 3 months. And we had like about 100 volunteers trained in 3 months. And by the time Flight 800 happened, TWA had trained over 600 individuals. 600 pilots, flight attendants, management, ramp, mechanics, unbelievable individuals. And we activated 400 of them to take care of the families of the victims of Flight 800.
I know Pan Am tried to do their best in 1988 with Lockerbie, but you were there in London and Lockerbie with families and employees, and you were there with TWA 800 in 1996. How does that make you feel that you took some of the challenges from 1988 and that disaster and was able to develop this program that helped people deal with the disaster in 1996?
How does it make me feel? Well, to me, it was just the right thing to do because I didn't want to see people, I call it burned, emotionally burned. And we had a very good program. In Pan Am, the folks that showed up did a great job. They did a great job. They did everything that the TWA folks did, except TWA had training. TWA were more organized. We were organized. We had multiple people trained. That we had like team leaders and team members, and but we got a lot of criticism from the politicians. Everybody goes nuts and they're territorial in the aftermath of aviation disasters. So I actually feel perhaps quite rewarded that I was able to develop the program. And also I have to acknowledge the support and cooperation I got from senior management at TWA. They were wonderful, wonderful.
Let's talk about you personally.
Do we have to?
Well, as you said, we could do whatever we want on this podcast. Let's talk about TWA 800 for a moment. Another disastrous incident that crippled an airline, just like Lockerbie crippled Pan Am, Flight 800 crippled TWA. What was going through your mind in 1996 when TWA 800 happened?
Oh my God. I was actually in Santa Barbara on vacation. And back then, Tom, we didn't have cell phones. I mean, maybe there was a very few people that had very awkward cell phones, but we had beepers. And I was down by the ocean. I was going to be attending a conference, and I was down by the ocean just reflecting and being in gratitude. And all of a sudden, I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. There was absolutely no practical reason for me to have this overwhelming sense of sadness. But remember, I'm Irish and we're very intuitive and kind of psychic. And so then the beeper went off because they had a system where flight operations would simultaneously beep everybody that needed to be informed. And the beeper just went off with the number, and you called that number. So I went straight back to my hotel, which was like 2 minutes away from the beach. And I called flight operations. And they said, Flight 800 has disappeared from radar. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Because we had heard 103, Flight 103 had disappeared from radar. That was the first, I think, the first blast of news that executives got at Pan Am. So Flight 800 had disappeared from radar. Now, I was not as familiar with the flights and the flight number, so I didn't know where it was going, but I knew Flight 800 had disappeared from radar. So I called one of my coordinators who was in St. Louis, Marilyn Shull, a wonderful woman. And I go, Marilyn, what's going on? And she goes, Flight 800 going to Paris and then on to Rome has disappeared from radar. And I said, activate as many team leaders as you can, get them to the hotel, the Ramada Hotel. I will get in my car and drive down to Los Angeles and see how I can get to New York. And everybody's calling me. There was a cell phone. Everybody's calling me. I had some sort of an awkward cell phone. So, my boss, Chuck Thibodeau, had said, Johanna, I want you to get to New York. I said, so do I, Chuck. I'm on my way to the airport. I'm trying to get to New York. And so when I got there, they already had a ticket for me on American Airlines. And American Airlines is another terminal at LAX at the time. And so the TWA at passenger service agent said, run. I said, I can't run. I'm in civilian clothes. If you run with me, we have some opportunity of getting on that aircraft. And so she did run with me, and we got through customs and so on. And I'm very thankful to the American Airlines crew. I don't know them. I've never met them. But that captain on American Airlines decided to delay the flight for 2 minutes because he knew there was a TWA person that absolutely needed to get on that aircraft. So I got on and I was in the front, and there was phones on the plane. And I was able to use the phone, talking to some of the pilots that were team leaders and, so on. And they're telling me what happened. And then somebody told me, I can't remember who it was, Johanna, there was 53 TWA employees on board. And I go, wait a minute, what do you mean 53 TWA employees on board? I could not comprehend it, Tom. And so what happened was there was the operating crew, there was a deadheading crew, and then there was families and employees on vacation. So 53 members of the TWA family on board. I thought, oh my God, I have to put that over here and bracket it someplace because I know what I'm going to be facing when we get to the Ramada Hotel. And so there was a lot of things going through my mind, but I had faced it before. So, and it was really like a deja vu. So, and we worked extremely hard and extremely, what I feel, very efficiently. And again, all the managers of TWA worked so much in collaboration in assisting our team because their duties were to stay with the grieving family member until the body was repatriated and then escort the family and the remains to wherever they were going. And some of them were going maybe to Ohio, Tom, and some of them might have been going to Tel Aviv or Paris. And the way everybody, like we'd call over the chief pilot and say, so-and-so is going to be trying to get on this flight and they'll have cremains with them and so on, or remains. And it was amazing how it worked. I'm very proud of and grateful to, the Pan American people and indeed the TWA people. They have a great soft spot in my heart.
Let's go back to your recovery. You went into recovery in 1978. Do you want to talk a little bit about your journey, your personal journey?
Yes, and we'll probably talk later. I just finished my memoir, and my personal journey is very much part of that.
Yes, Flight with Weighted Wings is the book. Our listeners can purchase it on Amazon. I was going to talk about it later, but we can talk about it now because it kind of goes into your personal story of recovery.
It does. And it's very much part of course, it's a part of my memoir. And the title, along with my co-author, I think is a beautiful metaphor for a human being, a psychological metaphor of a human being who takes flight, but they certainly have weighted wings. So the weighted wings would be, some issues. Don't we all have issues? My recovery and watching other people that I helped get on the journey of healing is such a rewarding, it's just so rewarding and spiritual that I'm very, very grateful. I've done many things in my life, went back to school and got advanced degrees, travel all over the world, lecture all over the world, but my personal recovery comes first. And my personal recovery is about being centered and being in alignment physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And of course, intellectually. And so, and I love to help others. I'm committed to helping others. I've sort of dedicated my life to helping others, but in a very pragmatic way. I'm not in any way an enabler. First of all, I'm a professional psychologist now. That's my journey. I feel very blessed and very grateful. So, I'm sort of very fortunate individual.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about mental health. It's been a very important topic, I believe, for everybody. I'm very open. I see a therapist on a regular basis. And the reason why I'm open is because if somebody on this program is listening and they're like, well, if that guy can go see a therapist, then I can too. And that's good enough for me. But also I want to talk about mental health as it relates to airline employees, because we have many of our listeners that work in aviation, especially during this turbulent time with passenger behavior on aircrafts to flight attendants and flight crews. So let's talk about mental health and how it should be proactive. Everybody should see a therapist. I've said this for many years. I think the world would be a better place. Everybody has issues. I have issues. You have issues. And if we talk to mental health professionals, the world's a better place.
I agree. Now, I started working in the field as a professional in 1986. This is 34, going on 35 years later. And one disappointment that I have, and by the way, thank you for sharing that you're seeing a therapist. One disappointment that I have is in today's day and age, we still have mental health and substance abuse, which is a disease. There's still stigma associated with it. If somebody has a broken leg, everybody, oh my God, what can we do? What can we do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If somebody is suffering from depression or anxiety or another mental health issue or a substance abuse issue, they're ashamed to talk about it. And so for your listeners, I would really encourage you. There are some wonderful people, and we've come a long way. We have come a long way in understanding mental health and understanding substance abuse. So I would encourage you to reach out to a mental health professional in your, in your area. Are now on Zoom. They're doing mental health consultations on Zoom. Certainly a good friend or a good friend or a peer, you may want to talk to them, but they don't have the training to be objective. And so when you're with mental health professionals, they have training to be objective. And, I've been counseling for years, and I still counsel. I still have some private clients, and I now do a lot of public speaking and lectures. But I don't want to keep somebody in treatment for 2 years or a year. Usually it's brief, with the proviso. They can always check in. They can always come back to what I call be recalibrated. It's absolutely amazing because the majority of people are very healthy. They just need to, run something by a professional. I always say, if I have a problem with my car, I go to a mechanic. I don't go to a mental health professional. So if somebody has problems with emotional issues, they go to a mental health professional. And in the aviation industry, I want to give a little shout out here to Air Canada. Air Canada had the first national conference in Toronto last September, and it was called Cabin Crew Recovery Conference. And a major theme of the conference was destigmatization of mental health and substance abuse. And of course, in the United States, we've been doing that for years, and particularly among the airline industry. And, among the airline industry, each airline has their employee assistance program, but the flight attendants also have FADAP, Flight Attendant Drug and Alcohol Program. It's FADAP, Flight Attendant Drug and Alcohol Program. So that's a very, very effective program and actually funded by the FAA. So don't suffer alone, because untreated mental health issues and substance abuse issues get worse, not better, without an intervention and appropriate treatment.
And let me put it in a different perspective. So we go to the gym to work out our muscles and to build our muscles. And we should go to a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, counselor to exercise our brain muscle, correct? Is that a good analogy?
Yeah, well, our emotional rather than brain, because you will have a lot of individuals that are highly intellectual and highly compartmentalized and continue to stay in the cognitive, but they are hard pressed to find emotions, the affective level. I think the most important thing is, what do they call it? Emotional health. Emotional intelligence was what the authors came out with some years back, which is very, very, brilliant, but emotional health.
So you worked for TWA. TWA was purchased by American Airlines in 2001, and you were involved with September 11th aftermath.
Yes, I was. So I work with TWA, and I love TWA. Loved it. Loved the folks. And if any of you are listening out there, hello, TWA. And of course, my Pan Am buddy. So TWA was essentially purchased, and I'm not sure exactly where they were. Were they totally sold out and in the process of sinking crews and so on and employees? But 9/11 happened. American Airlines reached out to us to see if we could help out, and said, of course we will. And so they asked me first if I would go to Los Angeles. And I said, I'll be glad to go to Los Angeles, but I can... let me make a suggestion. I'd be perhaps more effective in New York because I'm very familiar with the resources in New York, and I could help your New York base. And they said, okay, that's very grateful, Johanna. So on. So fine. I got off the phone and I told my colleague, Ellen Crevette, who's a dear friend of mine to this day, was working in the EAP program with me. I said, we're going to New York. And so there was a pilot in our office, and he said, how are you going to get there? I said, well, we'll fly. What do you think? How are we going to get there? Of course, all the planes were grounded. So Ellen and I, we drove to New York from St. Louis. And Ellen's son-in-law was one of the firefighters that had been killed. And we knew already as we were driving. And so we drove to New York, and some of my pilot friends, which are just adorable from TWA, kept calling, and I kept teasing them. Where are you now? There was no GPSs back then. We had MapQuest. And I would tell them, I don't know, but I see a lot of Texas license plates. I was joking with them. So get to New York. It was absolutely amazing. On the way to New York, Tom, a friend of mine, Captain Greg Arikian from TWA, called and said, Johanna, Father Michael Judge, the chaplain to the firefighting department, to one of the firefighting houses, he got killed. Something dropped on top of him when he was giving last rites and anointing of the dead, essentially. So I said, oh my God, because Father Michael Judge had become very, very close to us in the aftermath of Flight 800, because he, along with other wonderful chaplains, helped us. So I got in New York, and to this day, I have no idea what hotel I stayed at, because we worked probably 18 hours a day, just like every other disaster. But what was different is every other disaster, we had multiple resources going to, it's like moths to a flame, essentially. At 9/11, people couldn't get there. The resources were slim. And my role was working with crew members and ground employees. And again, the American Airlines employees were amazing. And we did whatever we could. And I worked there for, I don't know, several weeks. And, came back. And shortly after that, American Airlines closed the TWA Employee Assistance Program, which was really, that was kind of another hard blow, quite frankly. And but I was able to negotiate with American, where I consulted with them, back to consulting with TWA. I consulted with American in Los Angeles. I was in their LA hub, and I was finishing my dissertation at the time and getting my doctoral degree. So, it worked out fine. And I had planned anyway on leaving and going into working directly in treatment centers with the patients. And that's what I did.
So Lockerbie, TWA 800, and 9/11, you worked all three of those disasters.
Yes, I did.
And then you moved to Las Vegas.
Prior to moving to Las Vegas, Tom, I worked at the Betty Ford Center.
Tell us about that.
I worked there as the vice president of their treatment center, and that was a wonderful experience. And so I worked there for 7 or 8 years, and then I came to Las Vegas, and I thought, I'm, at the Betty Ford Center. That's not going to be bought out, the Betty Ford Center. Well, it was. Hazelden, actually, from Minnesota, bought the Betty Ford Center. And so I got a great opportunity in Las Vegas to run a small treatment center. But I thought, I'm finished. I am finished with responding to disasters.
Mm-hmm. And then October of 2017 happens. For our listeners, October 2017 was the mass shooting in Las Vegas.
Yes, it was. And 2 years prior to that, I'd come to Las Vegas. And I was only in Las Vegas about a month or two. And they did a write-up in the local papers about me taking the position and so on, and that I was also very experienced in disaster management, and that I was very experienced in teaching what's called critical incident stress management. It's a 2-day training protocol. And I got a call from a fire captain, and my secretary said, so-and-so Captain so-and-so called you. And I said, okay, fine, let's talk to him. He wanted training for his people. And I go, okay, fine. I thought, training? I said, oh, well, I'll train. I hadn't trained them in a while. Ironically, I had trained over 200 first responders here. They call it a valley, Las Vegas, Clark County, North Las Vegas, and Henderson, and Boulder City. I had trained firefighters and police, 200 of them, on the methodology. Essentially what it is for the listeners is psychological first aid in the aftermath of a crisis. And to train these peers on how to help each other is quite a wonderful program. So yes.
And that was before the shooting?
Before the shooting, I had trained 200 first responders. And so the night of the shooting, I was in bed very early because I was leaving the next morning to go to Dallas to give a presentation for American Airlines. I continued with my presentation. I would continue to go to Dallas and my presentation because I knew I wouldn't be needed. You do not interrupt first responders' task. Don't interrupt the task. They're still in the midst of the task. But the firefighters, were taking people to hospitals and morgues and so on and so on. So, and the police, of course, their work is not done for quite some time. So I knew I'd be working with them, but I'll work with them when I come back. And American Airlines were great. I had planned on staying there 2 days, but I did my presentation. and they got me an earlier flight to come home. I came home and I worked with the first responders of the Las Vegas shooting for, oh my God, months.
So you knew that you were not needed until after
Yes.
the incident.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Because the normal way somebody would think is that, I'm needed, I'm going to go and help. But you knew that they didn't need your help at that minute.
Not in my role. Now, the families of the victims, they need immediate help, and the Red Cross are there, and the Red Cross will call in other counselors. That's not my role. I'm essentially a psychologist with a lot of crisis management experience. And I work with first responders and last responders, who are the coroners. So I had a great opportunity to work with the Las Vegas coroner and his staff also, who were unbelievable individuals.
Interesting. So you're a very busy woman. You travel the world speaking at different conferences, doing trainings. You have a new book coming out, Flight with Weighted Wings. There is a link in the episode description to purchase this book. And also, you're going to be on another podcast of two good friends of mine, Living on Brand with Kim and Glenda. And you can listen to that wherever you listen to podcasts, just like this one, Living on Brand with Kim and Glenda. You're going to be a guest on their show, too.
Yes, I am. And they are two unbelievable, incredibly positive, professional women. And I'm very excited about the work they're doing in supporting women. And I'm looking forward to being a guest speaker on their podcast.
So as we reach the conclusion of this episode, what words of wisdom? You have seen a lot in your career as a flight attendant, a purser, a trainer, in charge of the employee assistance program at Pan Am, and then setting something up that was new at TWA, working on some of the most heartbreaking disasters of the 20th and 21st century, Lockerbie, TWA 800, September 11th, 2001, the Vegas mass shooting in October 2017. What words of wisdom do you have for the listeners of this program about mental health, dealing with crises, and so forth?
Thank you. What I would say to the listener is that we are not alone. I'm not alone. I have a group of wonderful people in my little circle, and I live an authentic life today. I don't live with a public persona mask, a false self. What you see is what you get. And what I would encourage all the listeners to do is try to be as open and honest as you can with your close friends. And if there's something troubling you or something troubling you from your past, or indeed one of my great interest is healing ancestral trauma, because we really do inherit a lot of trauma from our ancestors. Reach out to counselors for an assessment. If you have a substance abuse, please reach out. This does not get better on its own. I want to say recovery from any substance abuse disorder and recovery from mental health issues is a beautiful journey.
Very good. Anything you'd like to add as we close this episode?
I really don't think so. But as we talk about all of these disasters, the airline folks used to have an affectionate term for me. They used to call me the disaster queen.
Oh, my.
Here's Johanna, the disaster queen. Now, I didn't ask for any of those. I didn't ask to be in the midst of any of those. I happened to be working for these airlines, and these unbelievable tragedies happened. I happened to be here involved with the Las Vegas first responders, and lo and behold, the worst mass shooting in the history of the United States happens in Las Vegas. So,
on this program, we are going to rename you the Disaster Queen of Help.
Beautiful.
How's that?
I like that.
You like that?
I like it, yes.
Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I very much appreciate your time coming on the program.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Pan Am was a pioneer in air travel and still stands as one of the most iconic and innovative airlines in aviation history. That legacy lives on at the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York, where you can explore the rich history of the aircrafts and individuals at the heart of the company known as the world's most experienced airline. For more information about the Pan Am Museum, check out our website at www.thepanammuseum.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. As was once a tagline in one of our commercials, we would greatly appreciate your support to help the Pan Am Museum continue making the going great. You can also support the museum by shopping on our online store for all things Pan Am, accessories, apparel, jewelry, books, models, and posters. We want to hear from you. If you have a question for us or want to share your story, our email address is podcast@thepanammuseum.org. As flight crews once said to passengers departing for their destinations around the world, thank you for flying, Pan Am.